Hey guys, this is Chaplain Bo Willett out in Tucson, Arizona. Hope you guys are doing great, man. Certainly miss you, and hope that the latter part of the season is a good one, man. It's awesome, and I hope you guys are enjoying. If you're in Arizona, I hope you're enjoying the heat, man. It is certainly roasting out here already. But anyway, I want to continue our study in the book of First Peter, and this is a really cool section on how to deal when things ain't going your way, and maybe because of an injustice, and so it kind of has an idea of submitting, and that's a word that we don't like too much, submission. It really means, biblically speaking anyway, when you think of the Bible and submission, it means to voluntarily place yourself behind or underneath someone, like of rank. So think of a military framework, and you think of commanders. And then there's people who are underneath them. And I'm not really good with military analogies just because I've never been in the military. But to submit to someone is to put yourself underneath. Now, unlike the military where you have to put yourself underneath someone because you're forced to, biblically speaking, it would be a volitional act, meaning something that you decide to do. You decide to come underneath. And that can be tough. Now, the greatest example of this is Jesus. Jesus, when he went to the cross, he submitted himself to the governing authorities. And it's kind of interesting the things that we're told Jesus said to the governing authorities of Rome. Because when they said to him, when Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea, responded to Jesus and said to him, and this is when he was before Pontius Pilate, when Jesus was before Pontius Pilate, before he was crucified, Pontius Pilate said, "Don't you know I have the authority to basically put you to death by execution?" Now, just so you know, the execution for the Roman citizens was never crucifixion. If you were a Roman citizen, you could not be crucified. Crucifixion was held to those that were deemed horrible people in the eyes of Rome. Certainly, it was such a low way to die, to be hung on a cross on the freeway. And that's how Jesus died. He died hung on a cross on a piece of wood up on the freeway. And what I mean by freeway was it was in the place where people could see him while they were traveling. It was the way the Romans said, you know what? This is what we think of you that aren't Roman citizens, and this is what we think of you if you come against us. And so it was a pretty radical way to go out, very humiliating, and filled with much shame, because even in the Jewish idea, the Jewish mind, according to their scriptures, the Old Testament, it says, "Cursed is anyone who is hung on a tree." And so the idea of being hung on a piece of wood, obviously from a tree, was the idea of being under the curse of God. And that was pretty radical for a Jewish mind, because the Jews were a stubborn band of people. And in their history, they always tried to rebel, not only from God, but also from other governors and other kingdoms. And it got them in a lot of trouble, for sure. And so the Roman governors of that day, of the time of Christ, knew how stubborn the Jews were. So they would end up crucifying them, putting them to this humiliating shame. And so when Jesus was before Pontius Pilate, and Pilate says, "Hey, don't you know I have the power to put you on the cross?" Jesus said, "You don't have any power that hasn't been given to you by my Father." What a radical statement Jesus says, huh? And Jesus submits himself underneath the the decision of Pontius Pilate. Just as Pontius Pilate said, okay, the Jews want to crucify you, have at it. And Jesus was crucified. But Jesus says nothing that happens doesn't go through my Father first. Now, this is important in our own life, because when we're faced with injustice, and it could be all kinds, there's many kinds of injustice that happens in our life. It can be economic, it could be social, it can be certainly relational injustice as well. We want to retaliate. And that's always the first idea. Sometimes even in a relationship with your spouse or with a girlfriend or someone in your life, you might want to retaliate. You might think you need to retaliate, and you might get that kind of sense in your brain and in your heart that it's time for you to kind of make your stand and retaliate and get back at that person. And one of the things that we're assuming in ourselves when we make those kind of decisions to get back at someone is that we know better, and that we are the ones who can make proper judgments. That's what's happening when we try to get back at people, is that we are assuming that we have an ability to judge rightly, that we can see things clearly. Those other people, they can't see things clearly, but we certainly can. And that's what we do. That's the assumptions that are made. So we think we know what we're doing. We think we can make judgments properly. And so we go forward with that judgment. We say those words that we shouldn't say. So we might cuss at someone. We might get mad at them and say something we wish we never said. Or we might get very angry at people and even try to lash out in other ways, harm them, tear down what they own. All kinds of other things could happen, right? And so, the idea of submission really fights against that, because the idea of submission is to put yourself, to literally place yourself volitionally by your own free will underneath what another person says. And that is a humbling act, man. That is one that is quite humbling to do, where you could say something, you could get mad, you could get angry, you could go back at that person, but instead you don't. Now, let me share kind of how this worked with Jesus. Because you might be asking, like, man, this seems pretty tough. Like, how does this work? But let's go into 1 Peter chapter 3. Verse 13 says, "Submit yourselves to every ordinance or institution of mankind for the Lord's sake." Okay, so because you're walking with God, you want to learn how to submit yourselves to every institution of mankind. Governing authorities is the thing in mind. And it says, for the Lord's sake. Because we seek to please God, we don't want to be people that are necessarily just down and out rebellious people. We want to be people that learn how to submit and walk in peace with those that are in the governing authorities. Now, sometimes this isn't the case. There's a few times we see in the Bible where it is good to move away from what the government is doing. And that's when they openly say something that is forcing you to do something against what God's word clearly says. So, for instance, in the book of Acts, which is the history book in the New Testament, Peter, this guy who wrote this book, Peter and John are told not to teach the gospel, the good news. Don't teach about Jesus anymore. And they respond by saying, we can't do that, because that's something that Jesus commanded them to do. And so they did it in peace. They did it with love in their heart. They didn't have any animosity towards people or the governor, but they just simply said that we just cannot do that. And they were arrested. So there's times where that's going to happen. But on the whole, the principle is submit yourself to every ordinance of mankind for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors, as to those who are sent for him by the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do good. So it gives a little purpose for government there, right? And it is to what? Punish evildoers and the praise of those who do good, right? To be able to harness the evil that's out there in society and to be able to reward those who are obedient or those who do the right thing, right? As the old Spike Lee movie was called, right? Do the right thing. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. Pretty interesting movie. Very, I think from the 80s maybe, but it was very good back then and it's still pretty good. And it says, for this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So when people are acting in foolishness, it doesn't tell us to act foolish too, but it tells us to actually do the right thing. For this is the will of God, that by doing good, that's the right thing, doing good, that you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So that's how we should be. See, we're free in God. Because of our love relationship with God, we are free. We are free people to do what we need to do, but we're always letting the principle of love govern us. See, we don't need all the laws of the land per se, right? Because the love of God governs our heart. And when the love of God is in your heart and in your mind, then you ain't going to want to harm people. You're not going to want to hurt your neighbor. You're going to want to help them and look at other humans in right ways, in good ways, right? So we have this wonderful freedom in God to love people. And we should look at it that way and not want to use that freedom that we have, to do any harm to people. And we have a lot of freedom in this country too. And we don't want to use that freedom in an unwise way. Now, let me get to the crux of the matter. How did Jesus be able to submit himself to those who killed him? I mean, that's super radical. Now, it says that Christ also suffered for us. And it says he suffered for us, leaving us an example. This is verse 21 of chapter 2. He left us an example that we should follow in his steps. See, if Jesus really is the rabbi, the teacher, then we need to follow underneath, and we are the disciples. We are to follow under his footsteps. And it says that there was no sin in him, nor there was any deceit found in his mouth. Nothing, no deceit, no ill will, nothing that he said that was a deceitful deceitful origin in his mind, in his heart. Nothing like that. Nor was any deceit found in his mouth. Who, when he was insulted, he did not insult in return. And when he suffered, he did not threaten, but he committed himself to him who judges righteously. Now, this is the answer. When Jesus was being inflicted with pain by the Roman government, also by the Jewish government, hand in hand working to crucify him, to rid him from being on the earth because he posed such a threat, not because of anything he did wrong, but because who he claimed to be. What they did is they insulted him. But it says that when he was insulted, he did not insult in return. And when they threatened him, he did not threaten back. But, now this is it, he committed himself to him who judges righteously. What does that mean? This will help you out in your life, big time. Jesus committed himself not to wrath against people, not to wrath against anybody, right? But instead, he committed wrath, the judgment, over to his Father. Meaning, this is what Jesus did. He had faith that his Father could judge people the best. He believed in his mind and in his heart that they weren't getting away with anything, that no one's getting away with anything. that everybody will have to stand before the judgment seat of God. And because of that, Jesus could give people over to his Father. He could say, you know what? In his mind, he says, you know what? My Father will judge you. I'm going to not inflict any harm on you at all. I'm going to forgive. I'm going to love. And that's what I'm going to do as a human being. Now, just think if everybody lived that way. If everybody smiled. If everybody said hi. If everybody treated everybody nice. And if someone did threaten, that we would love them back. That we would be kind back. Even though people's heart, and that's hard to do. I remember when I got jumped once, and I've been jumped twice in my life, growing up in Los Angeles area. But I didn't do a good job. You know, when I got jumped, I didn't have love in my heart. I wasn't kind. I didn't think good thoughts towards them. I had evil in my heart. I didn't want to just get back with them at the same measure they hit me. I wanted to do more. I wanted to see them dead. And that is a scary thing when that kind of fear and hate is going on in your heart, in your own heart. That's happening. And it happens in a snap. I don't know if you saw that, but I snapped. But that happens in such a quick moment. And so Jesus, the perfect man, all God, all man, wrapped into one, he is the perfect rabbi, man, the perfect teacher. And what does he do? He says, you know what? My Father could judge you far better than you Romans, far better than anybody. I'm going to commit you into my Father's hands. Now, that's what we need to do. Even on smaller levels, you're in a relationship, you're getting ticked off. Do you know how to understand that person, that your wife or your girlfriend or whatever, don't you know that God can judge them? Do you believe that? Do you believe that God could touch their heart and speak to them? Or do you think you have to manipulate everybody or everything because you feel you can judge better? Remember, that's the assumption that's made when we do not submit, when we don't come underneath. And the biggest submission that I'm talking about is coming underneath the Father, putting yourself volitionally underneath him. You allow him to judge, and instead you just do what you're told to do, and that is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So you can get mad. You can get all hissy at your coach. You can get hissy at this person and mad at them. Nothing's wrong with talking to them. That's fine. But when you start getting into judgment mode and you've tried maybe to talk to someone and it doesn't work and it's not happening. And then, you're starting to build up with that wrath, that anger, that bitterness in your heart. That's an issue of faith now. You need to take that before God, and you need to say, God, I'm going to trust you that, you can deal with that person. I trust that you're big enough. You're powerful enough. If you created the world, you can touch these people. And I'm going to trust you with that. Because if you don't, you will, in your pride, assume that you can judge better. And you will try to judge, but it won't work. You might get what you want, but you might coerce or manipulate to do so. And that doesn't produce the righteousness of God. That produces what we call self-righteousness, which self-righteousness is no righteousness at all. So, hey, what do? We love, we smile, we be kind, we be gentle. We try to help, we try to talk to people like John and Peter did to the authorities of their day. Sometimes they won't listen, but it doesn't mean that we get angry and start fighting back and we start getting that boiling over, right? That wrath. Instead, we submit ourselves underneath the Father, realizing that no one's getting away with anything, that he is the ultimate judge. That'll help you have peace in your life, because if you feel the need that you have to judge in your life, you will always have tension. You will always, and all it's going to cause is more pride, because you're going to be manipulating more. You're going to be having to think that you're making the right calls all the time, and it'll just cause ladder conflict in your life because it's not from love. It doesn't stem from love. It stems from many other things. And a lot of it deals with pride in our own heart. So what a good message and a good kind of focus point for us, right? To commit judgment into the hands of the Father and ask the Father to give us a heart like Jesus to love people, even through difficult times. So you guys have a great one, man. Wish I could be there with you and finish the year well. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.